you, Cassandra, and thank you, Frank, and for that welcome. And I also honour the Wiradjuri people. I and my fellow speakers, including fellow parliamentarians. I see Adam Bant, a member for Melbourne here, and I know that Rachel Seward will be joining this great conference to look at social action in an ever-changing world in the coming days. I wish the conference great success. And in a start to your deliberations, let me say I want to honour the people who do work for social change in Australia. In researching for the talk today, nothing could be clearer, I think, than the fact that the chief executive of just one bank, one person, is taking home every day, on my figures, more money than many people working in the aged care sector take home in a year. This is an Australia that is out of whack, and what we're talking about at this conference is not levelling everybody, but certainly bringing fairness back into the country with the motto of a fair go. Now, speaking of that, fairness also has to be intergenerational, and when it comes to tackling the issue of climate change, we have to look at the world our grandchildren will inherit. According to economist Sir Nicholas Stern, our grandchildren, if we don't act on climate change, will have 5 to 20% of their wealth taken from them by the need to mitigate the damage that will occur. Who's causing the damage? Well, it is the big polluters. And the Greens policy is very clear on this. It is government's role to intervene where the market is not working, and Sir Nicholas Stern also comments that climate change, failure to act on it, is perhaps the biggest market failure in history, and to ensure that the people who cause the problem pay for it. The polluters pay principle. That is why we are working in the national forums, in particular our parliament in this, one of the world's 4 oldest continuous democracies, for a carbon price, which will put a price on carbon in such a way, and the current proposal we all know we're looking at is a carbon tax moving to a carbon trading scheme, which will put a price on carbon, deters the future production of pollutants into the atmosphere and transfers our economy to clean, green, renewable energy. En route to that, the proposal is that that carbon price on polluters should be money that not only rejigs us to a cleaner, greener economy, but which helps low and middle income households to cover the cost, the inevitable cost prices which will come out of a carbon price. Not that it's going to be as big as the current price rises we're seeing due to the price of coal and a high price of coal and the need for refurbishment of transmission systems, because it appears it won't. The opposition, the Tony Abbott opposition, has a different formula, which is to take the money off households in Australia and give it to the big polluters. There isn't an economist that we know of who supports that option, because it's much more expensive. And in the figures that we have, which, by the way, the Prime Minister has proposed in Parliament, and I've not heard them countermanded, the cost of Tony Abbott's scheme will be $30 billion by the year 2020-21. That is money that will be both taken out of taxpayer funds and given to polluters to help them pollute less. For example, looking for carbon capture and storage, putting the pollutants underground, something that technology we must be very dubious of. But then buy international offsets, because they'll fail to reach even the modest target of a 5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. This will take $30 billion, as I said, and by 2020-21 be costing the average Australian household $720. I repeat that. The coalition formula will by 2021 be costing the average Australian household $720. So when you hear Mr Abbott talking about a great big new tax, have a little look at what it is. It is effectively a tax on average Australian householders to prop up the massively wealthy big polluters. And that is something Mr Abbott has to be very worried about when and if, and we propose it will be when, the government, the independents and the Greens reach an agreement about the way forward on a carbon price mid-year. Our intention, as I said, is to reverse the Abbott formula and ensure that the big polluters pay, not the average Australian household, who will be assisted through any disadvantage that comes from a price on carbon. Then there's the mining tax. As you know, a couple of years ago, Mr Henry, the Secretary of the Treasury, was commissioned to look at Australia's taxation system minus the GST. And that report became available mid-last year. And it proposed to raise effectively about $140 billion off the super profits, massive profits, mining companies are making in the Australian mining boom, which we are middle of right now. $140 billion over the coming decade. Roughly, therefore, $14 billion per annum. This sent the mining corporations into apoplexy. They wanted to avoid that money going to the good of the Australian nation, because they wanted it to extend their bottom line, their profit line. So they engaged in a $22 million, not billion, but $1 million advertising campaign, and the then Labor government, you'll know, changed leaders. Prime Minister Gillard was inducted, and together with Treasurer Swan and the Minister for Minerals and Energy, Martin Ferguson, from this city, decided to come up instead with a mineral resources rent tax, which cut the income over the next decade to the national treasury from $140 billion to less than $40 billion. In effect, that $22 million campaign enabled the mining companies to reduce their return to Australians who own the minerals by $100 billion or $10 billion per annum, remembering that that was a Treasury recommended tax, not some extreme green tax. It came from Treasury. The extraordinary thing about this is Conservative Treasury has one supporter left standing in the political arena. That's the Greens. Standing in the political arena. That's the Greens. Because we believe that the full resource super profits tax should have been levied. Well, we're down to some 40 billion, in fact 38.7 billion, according to the study I'm releasing today from economist Naomi Edwards, who's looked very carefully at this and using primarily Treasury and industry figures. We have then looked at the other component of the tax proposal now before government, which is to cut corporate taxes by 1%, from 30% to 29%. What does this do? Well, in turn, it halves the tax inflow to the government again. That inflow goes from 38.7 billion down to 18 to 19 billion, 47% cut in what's left. So you've got a tax proposal for about 140 billion coming in after the miners got to the big parties at about a little less than 40 billion, now being cut, once you give the tax cut back to the mining corporations and other big businesses, to less than 20 billion. And you can see that what has happened here is a Treasury proposal, a Conservative Treasury proposal, to ensure that we made money out of our minerals boom as a nation, to put aside for future nation building and to pursue the dictum of a fair go in this country has been cut to ribbons. And we, the Greens, know how the numbers lie in the Parliament. But I'm going to be very pleased come July 1 when there's an extra 4 Green senators join our team of 6 currently in the Parliament. But our proposal, and I put this to the Treasurer in conversation, but we'll be following it up with this report, is that having given the big corporations a $100 billion break from the super profits tax, it is fair enough for the government now to say, but we're not going to extend to you a further tax cut, which is going to take another 18.7 billion out of tax revenues for Australians over the next 8, 9 or 10 years. That seems eminently reasonable. What will we get? We'll get a massive campaign from the miners again. It started this morning with the big side of town saying that they don't support what the Greens are doing. No surprise, really. But let's see what that money ought to be going to. As far as the Greens are concerned, if we kept that money, and 2.4 billion will be lost out of the budget year after next, for starters, if the tax cut goes ahead, we would be able to be funding, well on the way to funding the start for a national Denticare, national dental health system, paralleling Medicare. If that money is available, we would be able to look at a $50 increase in New Start, in Austudy, in Abstudy, in the youth allowance, and so on. If we had that money, we would be able to start to pay aged care workers a fair wage for the extraordinarily important work they do for all of us. I was appalled to hear on local TV news in Tasmania a couple of weeks ago some women who had gone to the extraordinary length of protesting outside their own place of work in aged care in northwest Tasmania, and one woman saying that she, as an aged carer, was getting less money than her grandchildren at the Woolies checkout. And we, as a nation, take for granted so many people working in the social services sector, not least aged care workers. And when I hear these massive reversals in a Treasury recommended fair tax on the big mining corporations, I know that we're losing our ability to bring fairness back to pay those workers. It's as simple as that. And we are not going to let that happen without a fight. There will be a fight from the mining corporations, but I hope that the community sector will join in this community debate, because it's one that fair-minded Australians will support us in. It is a fair go. And we are not asking for some extraordinary or extreme policy here. We're simply saying, let's have the Treasury policy of the original tax kept, at least a modicum of it kept, from this massive reversal that is now a government policy and may well be opposition policy. I'm looking forward to the coming debate. We are facing a budget which is going to see very savage cuts right across the board. Face that, ladies and gentlemen, that debate, knowing that the mining corporations are making a mozza out of politics in Canberra. And it's time fairness was brought back into the equation. When I see corporations that are making 14.2 billion, like Rio Tinto, it sends 70% of its profits out of the country, then it's going to benefit, along with BHP, many hundreds of millions of dollars from just that tax cut. A large amount of that will flow out of the country as well. We know that it's time to make a stand to halt this erosion of the taxpayers' rights to get a fair return on their minerals income. So it's going to be, the next few months are going to be a very interesting but testing time for public discourse. And I assure you that in the National Parliament, the Greens will be fighting very strongly to see that a little better of the share of that mining tax is available for the promotion of the very basis of today's conference, which is challenging inequality, social action, inaction in an ever-changing world. Well, we're for social action in an ever-changing world. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.